Hey friends, you're watching BrainStormAcres. I'm Henry. I'm in the kitchen and it's hot. Not as hot as it was 2 days ago. It's over 90 degrees in the kitchen again. Of course, it's probably close to 100 degrees in the pantry where the freeze dryer is working right now. But I still have to get some things done. My job today is to slice up some roast beef. I cooked this roast beef 2 days ago and stuck it in the refrigerator. We've had a few meals on it, which has been really good, but it's time to start carving it up to go in the freeze dryer. Well, since this is going in the freeze dryer, I'm going to trim off some of the fat on the outside because that's really not something that helps us when we're making sandwiches or doing other things with this roast beef. I cooked the roast beef to a medium rare. Now you may wonder why I only cooked to medium rare and not to medium or even to well done. Well, besides the fact that both of us prefer a medium rare roast beef, it's also because I've discovered that freeze drying meat can end up with being a little tougher than you might expect. Now, there's plenty of time to think about what's going on in life when you're slicing beef this way. I think that's enough for cutting off the fat. Well, how did I cook this roast beef? It's pretty simple. This was about a 3 3/4 pound roast beef. I have another one in the refrigerator that's close to 6 pounds. So all said and done, we have about 8 pounds of cooked rare roast beef. I coated both of the roast beefs, the roast beef with oil, and I sprinkled some kosher salt on top. I sometimes will put fresh ground pepper on the top, but I decided not to do that this time, and I cooked it. Well, at our altitude with our stove, our oven, it takes about 20 minutes per pound to cook to a rare roast beef or medium rare roast beef. I set the timer to go for 60 minutes, 1 hour, which was less than what it should actually take, and I took its temperature. The roast was down around 118 degrees, which is too cold. I wanted it to get up to about 125 to 130 because it would continue to cook once I pulled it out of the oven. Put it in for another 15 minutes, came out perfect. You know, a freeze dryer is a really nice product to have at your disposal, but it takes some preparation. You know, we have probably, I would guess, 70 or 80 meals worth of prepared freeze-dried meals. That's a lot of food. But you need to have some variety and some alternatives. What I learned in the process of doing some of this freeze drying is that you can actually make the meat become tough if you cook it too long. That's one of the reasons why I elected to stop cooking at medium rare. Now you may notice I'm slicing this roast beef thin. That's because this is an eye of round. Eye of round is a fairly tough meat if you cut with the grain. Cutting against the grain and cutting it thin makes it easier to rehydrate, and it makes it easier to eat. This is the slow way of preparing roast beef for freeze drying, or for any purpose actually. Now, if I'm just going to make roast beef for a meal, it's not a big deal because I can cut up some roast beef, prepare it however, that is once it's cooked, then prepare it however we want to use it for dinner or lunch. And it's not a big deal. It doesn't take very long to cut off, well, between 1/3 of a pound and 1/2 a pound, depending on how we're going to use the roast beef. I'm really shaving this as tight as I can to make it as thin as I can. I'm trying to make it basically be a deli sliced roast beef. It'd be a lot easier, a lot faster to do this if I had our old meat slicer. It was a powered slicer using an electric motor. It worked very well until part of the carriage broke. There were no replacement parts available, which meant it had to go away. Now, our kids also were out of the house, and we didn't need to cook as much as we did before. When our kids were home, we frequently had kids staying overnight. We let the boys play their Dungeons and Dragons out on the screen porch when the weather was decent. They had sleeping bags that they could crash if they needed to. And the good thing was we knew where our kids were. Our daughter was very active in cheerleading after she stopped figure skating. And she had a good crew of close friends. And they'd come over and they would practice cheers. Sometimes they'd be fooling around with makeup. But mostly they were all very physically active, so they were really interested in making up new cheers, trying new cheers. The only thing that we didn't let them do in the house was, this was an athletic team of cheerleaders, and they had flyers, that is the people who get thrown up in the air and land on a person's hands on the bottom. That's called a base. Now, that was not something that we were going to let in the house. First of all, there wasn't enough space between their heads and the ceiling. They couldn't even do it in this house. This is only a 10-foot ceiling, and they'd still run their head into the ceiling if they did it here. And because we didn't have any safety equipment, and the girls knew it, they didn't agitate to go outside and try to do acrobatics of that kind. Now, if they wanted to do handsprings and back bends and those types of moves, that's fine. We just didn't want them trying to do things where they could actually injure themselves, because we didn't have any mats like they had in the gym, we didn't have any spotters, and we didn't really want to have that kind of liability, and the girls respected our wishes. As you may notice, it takes time to slice roast beef thin. Well, it takes time to slice anything thin. One of the reasons why I let this eye round sit in the refrigerator for 2 days is because that firms up the meat while still keeping the juices in it, and lets me cut it much easier. Well, actually, it's not just cutting it, it's actually slicing it. We had some sliced roast beef today on a salad for lunch. It was great. And by slicing this beef thin, we get the advantages when it comes to rehydrating, and it rehydrates incredibly quickly. I just put a little bit of water in the bag that has the roast beef slices, and just a couple minutes later, they're ready to go on a sandwich. You know, there's a lot of logistics that goes into running a freeze dryer at home. You don't think about it, but you have to have some place for the freeze-dried food to go, to be stored. Now you can store it in mason jars, which we do. I have some freeze-dried potato cubes over here. In fact, maybe I'll just grab one and show you. Well, the freeze-dried potato cubes have gone into storage in the pantry, but I do have some freeze-dried lime slices. These are great for garnishes. And like many other things that I freeze dry, just put this in a dish of cold water. It will reconstitute pretty quickly, and we have fresh lime. And I have more slicing to do. This is going to take a while. When we go to the big box stores for food, we'll look for fruits and vegetables on sale. Because we live kind of at the tail end of the distribution chain for many, many fruits and vegetables, it's difficult sometimes to get the kind of vegetables or fruits that you want. So when we go to the big box store, Irene will pick up lemons if they're a good price, in volume. We have some avocados over here that are ripening right now. And we have a bag of limes and a bag of lemons. I have to talk to Irene to see how she might want to use the lemons. Certainly we could juice them and freeze dry the juice, but just like with the limes that I showed you earlier, we might want to have some freeze-dried slices. Make a nice garnish. You know, just because you go camping doesn't mean you have to eat ugly food or bad food. Well, it doesn't mean you have to. One of the things that freeze drying has definitely brought to our repertoire is the ability to bring some really nice meals that are all prepared and ready to be rehydrated. We're still working out ways to rehydrate. We have some vacuum thermos mugs that we purchased off Amazon. It looks like they can actually do a good job for us. So the idea would be, open the Ziploc bag. It's actually not Ziploc. Open the resealable pouch bag. Put the contents into, oh, that's kind of thick. I'm going to cut that bit of thickness off. Maybe Rufus might have some fun. I'm getting down to the end of this particular eye round. I'm not going to cut it all up right now. I'm going to put this piece back in the refrigerator, and I'll lay out all these pieces of sliced roast beef on some parchment paper so I can put them in the deep freeze. The reason why I do that is I want to get them frozen before I put them on one of the freeze dryer trays. And that means I can put more than one piece of sliced beef in a layer. So I can have 2 or 3 layers because these slices are pretty thin. I think I'm going to stop cutting this one up now. But I have a nice selection of sliced roast beef. Let's put this in the refrigerator. And one of the things is when you have, definitely when you have warm temperatures like we have right now, you want to keep the meat in the refrigerator as cold as you can. I could put an ice bath here if I wanted to. It's too hot. So I'm just going to pop this in the refrigerator. I'll be right back and I'll show you how I'm going to prepare this to go into the freezer. I'm going to use parchment paper. This is a large roll of parchment paper. It's getting pretty low. We use a lot of it. There's the limes that I'm going to be slicing up and probably juicing. In the meantime, let's get this meat put on the parchment paper. Some of these pieces are a little thicker than I would have preferred, but hand slicing sometimes is a little tricky. I'm making sure to separate the sliced meat out so that they don't freeze together. Oh, by the way, monsoons are still continuing here. You may hear some thunder out in the background. Yes, we're having lightning. Put a second piece of parchment paper down and continue stacking the meat. Now I'll be segregating out this freeze-dried meat once it's out of the freeze dryer. Pieces that are just perfect for roast beef sandwiches will go into one set of pouches, and beef that is good for a major meal will go into a different pouch. That means that I can accommodate some of these thicker slices without any hassle. Now I freeze everything that's going to go into the freeze dryer. Yes, you heard me. I freeze it before it goes into the freeze dryer. And that's for a couple of reasons. First of all, the deep freeze has plenty of room in it. The second reason is because by freezing it first, I don't have to wait for the freeze dryer to freeze it from a standstill. A typical load, if I start with unfrozen food, takes between 9 and 10 hours to freeze in the freeze dryer. And then the actual freeze drying process will start. Now I can cut probably 6 hours out of that by simply pre-freezing it. Well, you may have noticed I didn't have any tray or anything underneath this roast beef when I was putting it on the parchment paper. And sliced meat is a pretty floppy product. So how am I going to get it from the kitchen into the deep freeze? Well, the answer is pretty simple. I'm going to use a cutting board, slide this whole thing onto the cutting board, and put the meat plus the cutting board into the deep freeze. The cutting board I'm going to use is a thin plastic one. That means I'll be able to take all this away and it'll work just fine. Well, thanks for watching. Don't forget to hit like, subscribe, and ring the bells for notification, because got a lot more of this going on. A lot more of that going on. Monsoons. A lot more of that. Lightning going on. Oh, Irene's down in the studio getting ready for the next event. So, stay tuned. We have a lot more coming. Don't forget to brainstorm. We are. A lot.